समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments around the world. Now, Swasti, today we start with a question from Ankit Malhotra from Germany, who watches your show from Germany, and he's a big fan of your geopolitical take. And Swasti, he has a question on the changing nature of India-US relations, and he wants to ask you that do you think it still makes sense for India to go ahead with the GE F414 engine deal, and does this mean long-term dependence on US for such critical technology?
Yeah.
What is your view on this?
Well, thanks Ankit also for your compliment, and it's an important question. I think this is something that everybody is sort of mulling over, that given that Donald Trump's attitude to India has become so hostile. Now first you have to understand why is he mentioning the GE 414, okay, and that will give you an idea, because it's not just the GE 414. Basically the engine relationship that we have developed with the GE, which is General Electric, which is an American firm which makes engines and jet engines, is basically about two kinds of engine. One is a GE 404 and the other is the GE 414, and Ankit's question is on the GE 414. Now right now, as you know, that India is developing its indigenous fighter jet, and the indigenous fighter jet program is called the LCA Tejas. Now LCA Tejas has three variants. LCA Tejas Mark 1, which the first one, the 40 aircrafts are now finally ready after many years of delay. Those LCA Tejas Mark 1 have the GE 404 engine, which have already come. The second variant is called Tejas Mark 1A. Tejas Mark 1A also has the GE 404 engines, okay, and Tejas Mark 1A is the one that we are currently procuring engines for. Now the Tejas Mark 1A is supposed to replace the aging fleet of the MiG-21s, and currently as of July 2025, India is having two operational squadrons of MiG-21s, and they are all the upgraded versions. They are called the Bison variant. So now India is left with about 36 MiG-21s, and they are supposed to retire. They have been in service for many decades. The first one entered service around 1963. So India is wanting to replace them with the Tejas Mark 1A. Now, as far as Tejas Mark 1A is concerned, again, the total number of aircraft that Indian Air Force has given an order to HAL for, the HAL for, the first order was given in 2021, about 83 aircrafts, and the second order was given in 2025 for another 97 aircrafts. So in all, we have an order for about 180 aircrafts. Those aircrafts are dependent on the GE 404 engines again. Now the third one is the Tejas Mark 2, for which we are in talks with the GE once again for procuring the 414 engine. Now just to tell you very quickly, the negotiations have been going on for 2 years almost, and they are likely to be finalized. And here let me underscore the word likely to be finalized. There is a negotiation from the Indian side, very hard negotiation to get as much technology transfer as possible. But as you know, that India-US relationship remains to be, a little strained, and under prevailing circumstances, I don't think everything will just go on smoothly. But let's come to the GE 414 later, because right now there is nothing. I mean, Tejas Mark 2 shuru bhi nahi hua. This is something which is very futuristic. Once we sign the deal, then we start, producing and manufacturing the aircraft, and I don't know when it is actually going to happen, because even though timelines are given, but HAL has been very famous for actually not meeting its timelines. Let me sort of circle back to the Mark 1A, which is currently right now we are in the process of getting engines from the GE, which is a 404 variety. Now, just as all our ties with the US have been strained and so much has been happening, I mean, you would hear phrases like India-US relationship has been thrown under the bus, etc., etc. I mean, whatever, our worst case scenario perhaps has come true in that sense. But despite that, just 2 days ago, the GE India finalized another delivery of about 113 GE 404 engines from the US, and this happened only 2 days ago. And in fact, if according to that source, and it was all over the media, so I'm sure you can go and read it as well. So according to that source, the deliveries would start from September onwards. So this seems like, very close. So long and short, what I want to tell you is that if you look at the Tejas program, and out of the Tejas program, you look at the Mark 1, Mark 1A and Mark 2, all three variants are dependent on the GE deliveries, and GE has had problems in delivering earlier, and those delays have happened. Now you could argue that back then, when the India-US relationship was pretty hunky-dory, there were still delays from the GE, but those delays were not strategic. Those delays were technical. We had some other problems. They have also a lot of backlog to clear. But now, and I really think that you have some point to make, which is that with this kind of a uncertain president at the helm of affairs, you never know which side he would suddenly turn and weaponize. So the argument is, when an aircraft is designed, it is so many of its specs, so many of its details are designed according to the engine that it is going to have. So just because we have problems with the United States because of Donald Trump, I hope it is short term, but whatever that may be, you can't suddenly change it to a Kaveri engine or to some other engine, or you can't really do that. But it is true that for armed cars, which are also indigenous, which are advanced medium combat aircraft, and those are 4.5 fifth generation. We are hoping that whenever it comes, it is fifth generation. So for the armed cars, which are going to be our fifth generation aircraft, we don't know when it will come, but for the armed cars, the Indian government has already started to now collaborate with the French, with Safran, to really develop the Kaveri engine or the M88 engine, those are the indigenous engines that we had, and develop them to be deployable, to make them deployable into a jet engine. And this is again futuristic, and the reason why we're doing it is because we don't want to be tied down to the US. So just to sort of, I gave you all this primer to make you understand that as far as the Tejas program is concerned, we have tied ourselves down with the US, and the sheer nature of this dependence is such that once you get yourself tied to these kind of engine deals, then your dependence continues for 15 years, 20 years, okay? So I'm hoping that India-US strategic partnership will be back on track. But right now, the way things are, we cannot really cancel the contracts, because it will delay an already delayed program, because all these programs are fairly delayed. So even for the GE, please understand that India is a major customer for them, because if you put together the engines required by Tejas Mark 1, again GE 404, then engines required by Tejas Mark 1A, which is again GE 404, which is now under procurement, then for Tejas Mark 2, which will be GE 414, and then so all these three variants are completely dependent, and it's not just our dependence, it's also their bread and butter in some way.
With that very insightful answer, Swasti, we move on to the next question, and this is from our subscriber Nu Ahmed, who asks you that, do you think the United States is planning to use military force to topple the Maduro regime in Venezuela?
Now, thanks for the question. It's again a side of the world that we don't usually talk about. So it's always refreshing to talk about other sides of the world and learn and find out what is happening in those parts. So yes, the situation is pretty tense there. What Donald Trump has done is that Donald Trump has launched an aggressive campaign against Nicolas Maduro. And why? Because he says is within the bigger fight against Latin American drug cartels. And Maduro is the Venezuelan dictator. He has been in power since 2013, and he is an autocrat. He's not liked by many in the neighborhood itself. And things have now escalated to a point where the US has sort of deployed unprecedented amounts of naval assets and military assets, in fact mobilized a lot of troops and marines in the region. So of course, the international attention to that region is understandable. Since this is a complex topic, what I've done is that I have broken it down into a few elements for everybody to understand it in a simple way. So first we can start with the international side to it. So internationally and how everything is positioned, where are the big powers. So as far as US is concerned, it is very clear that America has made an enemy out of Nicolas Maduro, because America has also identified him as the leader of Cartel of the Suns, which has been designated as a terrorist organization, and Donald Trump has also declared a $50 million worth of bounty, on his head. And this is interesting because it's, I think, a lot more than the money that that was declared as bounty for Osama bin Laden. So that's one. Now, as far as his own neighborhood is concerned, I'm going to come to it later, but he is very isolated. Maduro is very isolated because he is looked upon as an authoritarian leader. He is looked upon as a mafia, in that neighborhood as well. Like I said, that in the neighborhood, of course, he remains a little isolated because Brazil, for example, has refused to even recognize Maduro's re-election in 2024. Colombia's, and by the way, all these governments are leftist governments. So Lula's government is leftist, Colombia's government is leftist, and even then they do not really recognize and support Maduro, who is famous to be, a dictator in that region. So Colombia's leftist government has also ruled out any kind of support. They said that no, if at all there is some problem between you and the US, you are alone, we don't want to get involved. Similarly, the Organization of American States, they have also emphasized that this is a bilateral issue, keep us out, we don't want to get involved. Basically, this is he's getting isolated. Similarly, countries like Paraguay, Argentina, Ecuador, all of these countries have designated the Cartel of the Suns as a terrorist group, pretty much, as America has done. So that sort of leaves a question on to who really supports Maduro. So frankly, his international supports is coming only from China and Russia. And in many ways, China and Russia are interested in the Venezuelan regime because it also gives them access to the vast reserves of natural gas and crude oil that Venezuela holds. But don't be under the impression that China and Russia are involved in that theater to an extent to really provide some kind of a military support. So that is not going to happen. If really America were to exercise a military option, against Maduro, except for statements, neither China nor Russia is going to, are going to come and really offer any real support in that sense. So that's the international positioning and the neighborhood. The second element I thought I should tell you about is that what is the level of US military preparedness. The level of US military preparedness itself shows that this is not just a regular fight against drug cartels or something. US is preparing itself for a likely escalation. As far as deployment is concerned, 7 US warships including the USS San Antonio, USS Iwo Jima and USS Fort Lauderdale with about 4,500 troops and 2,000 Marines are in the Caribbean. Okay. Then the P-8 spy planes are monitoring the Venezuelan waters day in and day out right now. As far as naval presence is concerned, of course, it is larger than normal, and basically it signals that US is readying itself for an offensive or deterrent action if required. Okay, and as far as frameworks have been concerned, if you go and read up, what the American discourse has been all about, they have been directed. The Pentagon has been directed to prepare military options against drug cartels and Maduro's network. So writing is pretty much on the wall. Okay, so that makes your question very timely. Of course, the natural question that then arises is that what is Maduro doing about it? Okay, so what has been the Venezuelan response? See, one is that of course he has obviously condemned whatever the US is doing, and he said that US cannot really dictate what I need to do. I'm a sovereign country, blah blah. He has also filed a complaint with the UN Secretary General. Of course, that is not going to mean anything because the UN Secretary General usually is not able to do anything in international conflicts. And most of the claims that he has been making are very, very propagandish in nature, which is that he's always, anything goes wrong for Maduro, he's always saying that it's the foreign elements which are responsible, or it is the opposition which is responsible. So as far as the broader context is concerned, and this is the last point, yes, it is true that United States has become very serious about this crackdown. In fact, what needs to be mentioned here is that many Caribbean and South American nations have actually supported Washington's fight against drug cartels. Okay, so this is something which also has the a kind of a tacit support, even if not direct support from the stakeholders. And what really goes against Maduro's favor is that, even internationally, he is viewed, like I said, as an authoritarian leader who's responsible for fraudulent elections, human rights abuses, corruption, etc., etc. So the case for Maduro is very weak. And if Donald Trump is putting all the deployment that I just told you about, you can expect that if at all there is a regime change, or if at all he is toppled over, I mean, don't even expect anybody to come and do something about it, okay?
Moving on from that very fascinating answer, Swasti, the next question is by Ashish Dev Singh, who is asking that with the situation that is unfolding in Israel and Iran, do you think another conflict is going to happen in the near future?
Yeah, actually, I have maintained that. So, ever since the B 2 bombers went and destroyed, they claimed to destroy, of course, obliterate was the word, of Iran's nuclear enrichment program, and the manner in which things unfolded after that, in terms of, the diplomatic flurry, etc., etc., it is an unfinished project. Iran, in fact, has earlier was saying it closed doors, and now they have mentioned it publicly. What I have noted down for you is that a senior Iranian official has warned as recently as August 18th, which is just a few days ago, that the war with Israel could erupt at any moment. And he says that whatever lull you are seeing after the 12-day war is just temporary. And why I say this is because my own assessment has been that the round 2 is going to come, and in the round 2 you will see that China is going to play a much bigger role in terms of sending weapons to Iran, because so far the weapons Iran, when the 12-day war actually happened, right, when Operation Rising Lion, etc., was launched and all that. So Iran, the foreign minister of Iran went to Russia, to Moscow, to ask for weapons, Arakchi, and Russia was not in a position to give any weapons to Moscow because Russia was so mired in the war in Ukraine. And in fact, this is something which is repeating because Russia was neither able to support Iran, Russia was before that not able to support Syria, Assad's regime in Syria, and Russia was not able to support Armenia or Azerbaijan. So Russia is completely getting fixated and relegated to its own internal war with Ukraine, and its export base has fallen, it's not able to play a role. When I look at this particular conflict, I understand that even from Iranian perspective and from the Israeli perspective, the way Netanyahu is doubling down on Gaza, the way Netanyahu is doubling down on against Houthis now, because of course Houthis have an advantage of geography because they are situated at the tip of the Yemeni tip, okay, and Israel of course is on the other side of that expanse. Nonetheless, if you the way Israel has been getting after the lives of these proxies and also destroying Gaza, it is very, very obvious that Netanyahu doesn't want the war to end, because the war ending is going to impinge upon Netanyahu's political career, and there are a lot of now discussions that Netanyahu could be behind the bars if the war were to really end. So Netanyahu has to keep the war on, and he has to keep the war on in a way that US is on his side. And from Iran's perspective as well, when you hear them, they say that no, this is an unfinished project. So in my opinion, the round 2 is coming, and very soon.
Building upon that, Swasti, even Ravi Rules, our subscriber, has a similar question where he wants to know that what is the current status and trajectory of the India-Israel relationship?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, India-Israel relationship, the kind of a bonhomie that you see between these two nations now was not the case always. Of course, for the longest time, especially under Indira Gandhi, we had more affinity to Palestine and the cause of Palestine, etc. But let's just talk about the arms deal, because you've asked about platforms. So India's arms trade with Israel began with a simple, supplier recipient kind of like a buyer-seller relationship. But over the years, recently it has evolved into co-development and co-production of equipment. And what is important, before I tell you what really is the kind of weapons that we get from Israel, what is important to note is that if you look at the SIPRI data between 2020 and 2024, because SIPRI does a 5-year assessment, okay, of data flows. So from 2020 to 2024, you see a very, very dramatic, realignment of how India has been having its weapons and where India is getting its weapons from. By the way, okay? You should know that India happens to be the world's biggest weapons importer, and it was only in the last 5 years that Ukraine became a bigger importer because of an long-standing war. Otherwise, it's been India. So India is so dependent on imports, and traditionally India's imports were only coming from Russia. So we have been dependent on Russia. So let's say about 2010 to 2014, if you go to that era, you will see that India was getting more than 75% of its weapons from Russia. But that has dramatically dropped now to 36% of weapons. So just as so Russia is still the biggest weapon supplier because of legacy platforms, because our entire armed forces, is built up on Russian platforms. But despite that, the thing for you to note, and why I'm giving you this data, is that Russia has fallen from that 70% to now a 36% in the latest Ep29 data. The number 2 defense supplier is France now, and it has risen to 33%, which is very close. In fact, by the time the next Ep29 data comes, expect France to overtake Russia, because in the last few years of the war, we have not really placed any significant order. Whereas when you compare it to France, we have only been adding on those orders. So the first position, of course, is held by Russia, but the second position is held by France. The third position is held by Israel. And the fourth position is held by United States. Okay, and again, these are important relationships because these are not really historical relationships for us. Okay, they started only very recently, and in a very short while, you have seen a kind of a meteoric rise. And now, when you connect that to the fact that this relationship started as a buyer-seller kind of a relationship, but now is moving into co-development, etc. And my own argument has been that India-Israel relationship, defense industry relationship must now go to the next level, which is co-designing, co-production and co-export. Okay, so we can identify countries that use Israeli weapons, and we can make those weapons in India so that they can be value added in India. They are cheaper in India because we have defense industrial corridors, and they have wonderful schemes that put together a very good defense ecosystem. So it's very attractive, and therefore we can sort of sell to third parties. But it has not really been happening. It should happen. Now, in terms of what India is getting from Israel, there are, of course, largely 2-3 kinds of things that India gets from Israel. One is missiles, and so you may have heard also, for example, the Derby missiles, so the Barak 8 missiles, which are all surface-to-air missiles. Okay, those missiles India gets from Israel. The second most important, equipment that we get from Israel are the drones. Okay, so we get, for example, different kinds of unmanned aerial vehicles, which are basically named for drones. So we have the Searcher variety, we have the Heron variety, we also have Harpies and Harrops, different kind of drones that we get from Israel. Then we get some bombs. Okay, for example, we get the Spice 2000, and we get the laser guided bombs, the LGB. So these are the 3-4 major kind of equipment that we get from Israel. So to your question, are we getting any advanced platforms? The answer is no. Okay, but having said that, like I said, that my argument is that if we have reached a particular level of co-production, then so much of that equipment is now being made in DRDO or with the help of DRDO. Now, the Prime Minister had recently gone to Cyprus. Okay, our Prime Minister had gone to Cyprus, and there was some discussion on defense cooperation, and one of the things that I argued then was that actually this is a good space for India and Israel to co-produce certain weapons, because there is a Barak MX air defense system that Cyprus has sourced from Israel, and like I said, that we also make the Barak 8 missiles. So there is some part of that particular platform that we can also co-produce in India. So these are discussions we should be having, because this is exactly the kind of discussions we have been having with France. France and India have signed a major and a very ambitious defense industrial roadmap. So in order to take the relationship to the next level, these are the steps that you require. Otherwise it will remain into this buyer-seller paradigm, or maximum just getting some weapons and probably also making them with the DRDO's help, and it will not really go to the next level, which is that when you start co-exporting. Now, whether that will happen, we will see. But just my last point in terms of Israel and India's relationship is concerned, I think what we must watch out also for is that not everything is hunky-dory between India and Israel weapons procurement. The Harop and Harpies drones that India sources from Israel, it's the exact drones that Israel also exports to Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Turkey are so close. In fact, they are called 3 states and 1 nation, okay, which means that they are like almost teen just make jaan, something like that, roughly. And through Azerbaijan, the Pakistanis are having a direct access into understanding how the drones work. I mean, of course, we also get some guns and all from Israel, but that doesn't matter because guns don't really have that cutting edge technology. But drones actually means a lot because it is based on the technology of the drone that you develop your counter drone measures, right? So those are kind of things that we need to be also a little careful about. But other than that, I would say that it's a good solid relationship which has actually covered a lot of ground in a very less time. So like I said, and for that we need to co-produce and co-export so that the stakes become more entwined.
And Swasti, since we are discussing Israel in detail, I'll take the final question where Lethal Knight asks that when the current Trump regime is becoming a sort of anti-India, can Israel act as a mediator in improving relations with Trump?
Now, there is some merit in this argument because I have read reports on, Mr. Netanyahu speaking to Prime Minister Modi, and obviously it would be in Israel's interest to keep both India and US on their part because obviously I just mentioned that Israel has a thriving defense industry relationship with India which has a lot of potential to grow. So, I don't rule out an informal nudge or informal encouragement for the both sides to break the ice. But formal mediation, I don't think so.
And on that note, Swasti, we move on to the next questions. And this is a question from our subscriber Agastya Kumar, who wants to know how close are we to the India-EU FTA?
Good question. There are 23 chapters in that FTA, and as of July 2025, we have agreed upon 7 chapters out of the 23 chapters. So, in that sense, the progress is not scintillating, okay, in that sense. It's not really out of this world, but there is progress nonetheless. However, as far as the political will is concerned, when Ursula von der Leyen had come to India earlier this year, with the entire College of Commissioners, which was in fact a big geopolitical statement that is the kind of importance that they are attaching to India. Both sides, I mean our side and their side, had mentioned that they would like to close the deal before 2025 ends. And then came Donald Trump and Liberation Day and all the other disorder that Donald Trump perpetuated. So very quickly, if you ask me technically speaking, it looks a little difficult that there are 23 chapters and you have been able to agree to only 7. Okay, so the other 23, the remaining, will have to be negotiated as well. That's the technical part. So if I look at it technically, I would say I don't see that happening in 2025. But if I look at it strategically and linking it with the larger issue of economic security and sort of all the disorder that Donald Trump has perpetuated. Donald Trump has also recently sort of elbow twisted the European Union into a very unfair trade deal with 15% tariffs and a promise of about $700 billion worth of investment in the US, etc. Now, because of this kind of a global instability, because of Donald Trump, it actually makes a lot of sense for India and the EU to to speed up their negotiations around the FTA, because EU is a big economic player in the world. It is the world's largest geo-economic bloc. It has massive, the size of its GDP is massive. In fact, going by the size of the GDP, it's only second to the US, okay? And even China, it has overtaken China also recently. That's that. And then there have been some issues, and especially around CBAM, etc., and opening up of agriculture, the same issues. But I think if you look at it strategically, and if you think of this particular trading relationship as a strategic agenda, I think there will be more motivation on both sides to try and seal some kind of deal. But knowing EU, I wouldn't be very surprised that it takes longer than we anticipate, because see, it is not just about the European Union. It's not about the Commission. Every single thing that is signed now actually goes back to member states to get ratified. So that is the reason why sometimes we crack a joke on the European Union saying that it is a body which is perpetually in negotiation. Brussels, you go to Brussels, everybody's negotiating because there are 27 different member states under one roof. So let's see what happens. Let's be hopeful. It is going to be extremely good for India. It is also in India's trade surplus right now. But like I said, that knowing Europe pretty well, I would be skeptical for the end of 2025 because it's around the corner.
Swasti, building upon that, we have a question from Noor Ahmed as well. And this is about India's trade relations, where he asks that instead of focusing so much on US, China, and Russia, shouldn't India's focus shift towards strengthening and expanding economic cooperation with middle class? For example, we could build consortiums like Airbus by pooling our resources with friendly middle power economies.
Yeah, no, I remember last time you asked the same question, and perhaps you were of the opinion that we did not take it up directly, although I thought that I have still taken it. Anyway, so I'll just go back and revisit your question again. I am totally of the view that India's obsession with the US and Russia and China on the one hand, and back home or closer home with Pakistan, I mean, that does not really do justice to India's strategic vision. And that is why when you read my column on Friday, which is my latest column, where I'm arguing why India and Japan should really shake off their slumber of natural partners, good partners, and really get into some kind of a mission mode and really utilize the potential of their relationship, is also coming from the same argument, which is that yes, there is a complexity that has descended India-US relations, India-China relations. We are managing it. There's an India-Russia also, Russia is mired in a war. There are serious limitations when it comes to our relationship with Russia. What kind of returns are we expecting from Russia? When will it be that Russia will be able to export our weapons again? I mean, we don't have answers to that. And at a time when there's so much uncertainty, it doesn't make sense for India to only keep all its eggs in the big players' baskets. There are also a whole host of middle, countries like Japan, UAE, France, etc., that we should be looking at more carefully. And that is why I'm of the opinion that India, Japan should really, talk about more tangible outcomes and keep more lofty ambitions, okay? Because our trade remains very, very low. Trade is just about $22 billion. Our defense cooperation has a lot of potential in terms of, getting good, cheap nuclear reactors from them, good quality. We can also get some very effective, warships and frigates, etc. from them. Japan has very good naval capabilities. Of course, now we are having this unicorn masks, and we have done something, but it is, I mean, compared to the kind of potential we have, it's nothing. So just coming and, circling back to the question you asked me, India should be, I agree with that part of your observation, which is that India should be actually doubling down with all these countries that are more stable. And there is so much more that one can expect in terms of returns to scale, okay? That's I agree with. Now, while I agree with the first part of this, your observation that India should double down on its relationship with more middle order countries, and there are so many, what I find a little problematic is that whether India can take the Airbus route or not, because if you look at Airbus as an example, now the countries that have come together and formed that consortium are basically France and Germany and Spain and UK, and they're all members to NATO. So in terms of the security outlook, in terms of the defense technologies they operate, there is a high level of interoperability, there's a high level of integration, and there is a common philosophy, okay? That model works. Now, when it comes to India, even an informal alliance like Quad is not able to work, okay? Even there are, strategic discrepancies in terms of how we view a certain challenge and how our partners view a certain challenge. And I think consortiums essentially will not work in a country like India because of India's insistence, and sometimes I feel a rather irrational insistence on strategic autonomy. Because if strategic autonomy is an end, okay, then how do you sort of reconcile that with the philosophies of other partners that you come together with? Because coming together would also entail that you have something which is very solidly putting you together. So I honestly am of the opinion that a consortium like Airbus would not really work in the case of India. I cannot think of 3 or 4 countries that India can be put together with, because even though India has close relations with Japan, but we have a completely different take on China. We have also completely different take on sharing in intelligence. We are together in Quad, and we still have not been able to develop, a real-time linking of maritime domain awareness. So, I think a consortium kind of a model would work better for more grey zone threats. For example, if India is coming together with other countries, putting certain capabilities together, let's say for the sake of tackling hybrid threats, I think there it has more possibility of working. But in terms of conventional helicopters, military equipment, etc., I honestly see a problem.
We have a question by Vinay Kumar, who asks that do you think India's recent engagement with China is a pragmatic necessity or is it a strategic compromise?
The first one, pragmatic necessity. It's not a paradigm shift or anything. I have written a great deal on that. We need to manage our relationship with China at a time when there is so much uncertainty. We don't want China, and there are multiple reasons. We don't want a Pakistan-China situation again, like an Operation Sindoor kind of a situation again. We don't want our neighbors, okay, to be encircled completely by China. So, I mean, we basically realize that we need to, need to have our own time to develop our capabilities. So whatever we are doing basically falls into the realm of a pragmatic necessity where we are trying to manage a complex relationship. The structural issues are not going anywhere. The structural issues are only kept aside, and we are trying to also now develop more proactive engagement. This is again a policy which is not new, which was there. Doesn't mean that the strategic trust has suddenly come back and everything is completely hunky-dory.
On that very suggestive note, Swasti, we come to an end of this episode. Please do send in your questions and we look forward to seeing you for a fresh new episode next week. Thank you.